a big unknown for a lot of us with this homemade bro science equation we're trying to run. It's our CDA, because most of us haven't been to the wind tunnel. Have you played around with stuff like Ghibli and these home aero sensors? And if so, how accurate are they?
I guess it depends what you want. Do you want accuracy, which in itself is a pipe dream for pretty much any setup, myself included? I'll try and explain why in a second. Or do you want the ability to test the differences between different setups? Because they're kind of a bit like different things. Do you want to know exactly what your CDA is, or do you want to know that X is faster than Y?
So is this like when parameters came out at the start and stages was massively, like it might have been 2% different to SRM, but then they started getting it where it was quite repeatably wrong, so you could, it still was a useful tool.
Yeah, exactly that. I think predominantly the vast majority of people don't need accuracy. They need to know is product X better than product Y? And sensors are starting to get there. There's still limitations. Primarily actually, the two ones are ability to measure both accurately and precisely the airspeed and yaw angle. And then the second one is your elevation. Elevation is like such a huge problem that I don't think until you dig into it as a problem itself, it's one that you just assume is okay and we've figured it out. But like barometric altimeters, they can't measure to the level that we need. And then you're having to bring other sensors into the mix and get sensor fusion, or you're having to do certain protocols that mean you ride out and back multiple times on the same section and now averaging the altitude out. But most sensors are getting to the point where they are useful for that. They will be able to tell you if one thing is faster than the other. I've worked a lot with Streamline. So John Buckley, I actually worked with him back at Mercedes Formula One in 2012, 2013. And then he's kind of gone and developed his aero sensor alongside Barney, who is Aerosensor, which is a bit of a confusing name.
Yeah, I had Barney on the podcast, actually. He's an interesting guy.
Oh, really interesting guy. And obviously, they split in part ways, but the technology they use is the same. And I'd say between those two, they're probably the ones leading, at least the commercially available sensors. There's a few other out there that I have a really good friend called Marco Manni. He's a Swiss aerodynamicist, works in wind power generation. He's designed and developed his own aerosensor. In fact, I've literally got it here. Which is quite cool little thing.
It's like a
Magic
it's
Wand.
like those medieval games where you're on a horse and you like lance at someone.
But it's a really cool sensor. I mean, it's pretty simple in how it's made it. But the good thing is that it moves the probe out of most of the static pressure interference of the rider. So when you're riding along, there's a big pressure front in front of you that your body is creating. And the further you can move that out of that, the less interference there is, because there's a lot of speed sensitivities to that interference, and also how you move your body if your head comes up or head comes down. So it's ideal to move it farther forward, but that's a hard thing to do for like a commercial product. How do you make it rigid and held in place a meter or a meter and a half in front of the rider? So it's a problem, and they're all trying to tackle it in different ways. But I'd say most sensors now you can get good data, and then most of it then comes actually having a good power meter, because power is the key bit to this. And there are a lot of crappy power meters out there. It's been like a race to the bottom for the past 10 years. Who can make the cheapest power meter, not who can make the best.
Yeah, I remember my first power meter, and I've told this story before on the podcast. I was 2005, I'm going to say, 2006. I was an undergrad in university, and I knew I hadn't got money to pay every month for a coach, but I was starting to dig into some of the data and understand, how you coach an athlete. And I was like, I need to get my hands on an SRM, but it was like €2,500 at the time. So I falsified like a bank loan application, told them I needed a car to drive to uni. It took me 4 years to pay that back.
But it was worth it.
It was worth every penny.
Your data was beautiful. I love SRM for just how open it is. The fact it's literally just a frequency output from a strain gauge, and they'll tell you what the zero offset is and they'll tell you what the slope is, and you can check it. And yeah, it just works. They had a few flaws in the early days around temperature compensation because of the simplicity of it, which they've since addressed, but it's just a really good, clean system. And yeah, I highly rate SRM. I'd say they're pretty much market leading. There's a few others that are getting pretty close, and there's a few others that absolutely have gone the other way. And like I said, are a race to the bottom, and the error sources can be horrific. I think anything that's single-sided, you may as well just put in the bin. It's not worth it for error testing. You at the very minimum need dual-sided. You have to have a good power meter, really. At least if you want reasonably accurate results, which is obviously another point that we talked about. How much do you actually care about the absolute value? And people claim like our CDA is X or CDA is Y, and it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because if your power meter reads 10% high, your CDA will be 10% high. So it's more a case of...
Yeah, so actually talking to Yuli on the podcast next week, who's the founder of SRM, meant to be a super interesting guy. Never spoke to him before, just had a bunch of back and forth on WhatsApp. If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. And click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.